We just finished the Revolution, the French Revolution, and we can't sort of tie this up without talking about Napoleon for a few moments. I think I mentioned in our last lecture that Napoleon is the great irony of the French Revolution. Here, French society has been turned upside down. The nobility and the church, the so-called privileged orders, have been dismantled. The king and queen have lost their heads. We've caused such an upheaval in the country, yet at the end of this process, what emerges? Another strong man, another man on horseback, another military hero in the guise of Napoleon. I read a review a couple of years ago of a new book. It seemed like a couple of historians had collaborated and had made a list of the most influential people in Western history. I can't remember if it was 50 or 100 or what it was, but I do remember reading the review of this book, and Jesus was ranked number one, and that's no surprise with the sort of pervasive impact that Christianity has had on Western culture. But Napoleon was ranked number two. And the reasons for this are actually quite clear. What Napoleon did, and I'm basically going to talk about significances here. I'm not going to give you a biography of Napoleon. You can go online or check out a book if you are interested. And he is fascinating and well worth reading about. But I basically want to stick to some of the big significances of Napoleon. Napoleon's ranked so high, I suppose, because he not only defended the revolution, he was the most able French military figure who defended the revolution against those states that sought to crush the revolution in its cradle. Don't let that baby grow up, kill it now. Or what was the metaphor I used in our earlier lecture? The French Revolution as a virus. We need to keep it contained. Napoleon was the most able defender of the revolution in its early stages. And then he was its most effective messenger. He took the ideals of the French Revolution and he disseminated them across Europe. Sort of crammed it down the throats of these old regimes that had resisted revolutionary pressure. Napoleon, the Napoleonic Code, of course, created the basis for law codes, not only in France but in other places. Even here in the United States, Louisiana, I think still abides in part by the old Code Napoleon. Napoleon, of course, grew to dominate Europe, and he is often regarded, I've seen more than one military historian describe him, as the ablest soldier in history. And you can read just a wide variety of discussion on this topic. I think one of the things that makes Napoleon such an effective commander is that he did command the largest armies in European history up until that time. And I want you to think about what he does as a commander, not only equipping and training ordinary citizens and turning them into soldiers, but he has to move these thousands of men, and sometimes hundreds of thousands. He has to move them across the European landscape. Now, these men, like all men, require something about 3 times a day, and that's something to eat. How do you feed a moving city? Napoleon was a genius at this. In fact, there are a collection of Napoleonic sayings or maxims of Napoleon. And I think one of them is the army marches on its stomach. So Napoleon was a genius at organization and making it possible to move these these large armies, which amount to moving cities, thousands and sometimes hundreds of thousands of men, moving from one place to the other along parallel roads or roads that will converge at some point. And the ability to maintain these armies, to move them across vast distances, and to keep them fed and satisfied is a remarkable accomplishment. Napoleon on the battlefield himself was a very effective commander. He could move his armies quickly. He could bring them together at the key point. He could concentrate his armies against his enemies and defeat them piecemeal, or bite off little bits and defeat that, and then turn and destroy another enemy army with his larger forces. The levy en masse was essentially taking the French citizen and turning him into a soldier. And once he became a soldier, of course, he was under Napoleon's command. Napoleon ran off a string of military victories one after the other until he dominated Europe. A couple of mistakes here. Let me say one more thing about Napoleon as commander. These armies, these European armies in the time of Napoleon, had three basic divisions of labor, shall we say. You had the infantry, you have artillery, and you have cavalry. And the traditional way of fighting was to sort of use these as, think of them as chess pieces. If the enemy advances his infantry, we'll advance our infantry. If the enemy brings in his cavalry, we'll counter with our cavalry. So what Napoleon did was arrange it on the battlefield so that he could use all these factors at the same time. He was a genius with artillery, so he could bombard the enemy lines with artillery as his own infantry advanced toward the enemy lines. And then he would hit the flanks of the enemy with his cavalry at the same time. This was horrifying to enemy commanders confronting Napoleon, who had never quite seen tactics like this. So Napoleon could move very quickly. He could supply his army. He could bring them together at decisive points in overwhelming numbers to defeat the enemy, and he did it repeatedly. I think it's also significant that in 1804, Napoleon crowns himself the Emperor of France. Now, you can see in Jacques David's famous painting of Napoleon's coronation, you can see that he takes the crown and places it on his own head. That is, he doesn't need to be legitimized by the Pope. It's not unusual in European history for the Pope to legitimize the ruler in some way or another, and then for the ruler, of course, to protect the Pope. This is a long-standing relationship. Here, Napoleon demonstrates that it's not the Pope that lends me my authority, it's the people of France. Napoleon's downfall, let me mention just a couple of things here. His invasion of Spain was a disaster. It was not effective. It was a drain on his manpower. There was a sort of guerrilla war going on in Spain. The Spanish, of course, were opposed to Napoleon's rule over Europe, and they fought back. They couldn't defeat Napoleon's armies, but they could harass him continuously and serve as a massive drain on his manpower and logistics. Now, after having sort of overrun most of Europe, there was one enemy that Napoleon could not subdue, and that was Great Britain. Britain, of course, had the world's strongest navy. Napoleon could not risk trying to move his army from France across the English Channel to invade England, knowing that the Royal Navy would be there to smash him to pieces. So he looked for other ways to bring England to her knees, and he came up with what's called the Continental System. This was basically just an embargo against England. Nothing in, nothing out. So this Continental System was designed to bring England to her knees economically and allow Napoleon to dominate her. There was one country in Europe that refused to cooperate in this Continental System, and that was Russia. Napoleon sought to bring the Tsar to heel and to force Russia to cooperate, and he invaded Russia in 1912. This, of course, is the infamous episode that's been endlessly depicted in art, in film. Even Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture is about this. Napoleon's invasion of Russia in 1812, he actually occupies Moscow. The Russians keep backing up, destroying the land in front of them, destroying all the food supplies in front of them as they back up. What do they call it? A scorched earth policy. Napoleon continues deeper and deeper into Russia. His supply lines extend now for 1,000 miles his lines of communication and retreat extending all the way back into Poland. As he moves further and further east, once he occupies Moscow, the Russians burn it down and leave Napoleon with a smoldering city and nothing to eat. And now winter hits. And of course, the Russian winters are legendary. Napoleon's Grand Army sort of melts away. I guess melt is not the right word here, is it, in this winter? But between disease and frostbite and sniping and ambushes, Napoleon's Grand Army is destroyed. The European nations will again form an alliance to try to crush him. He is defeated at Leipzig in Germany. He's exiled to Elba, the island of Elba in the Mediterranean. He conspires to escape the island and return to France. In a remarkable episode, he reclaims power. He returns to Paris, creates another army, and then is finally defeated once and for all at Waterloo by Wellington and Blücher. This time, the European leaders decide to exile Napoleon to a place much further away than the Mediterranean. They send him to St. Helena Island in the South Atlantic, a British garrison. And there he lives out his life, I think until probably 1824, I believe. So when you think about Napoleon, you're thinking about one of the more extraordinary figures in European history, one of the great generals of all time, a man of immense influence because of both the sort of crushing of old Europe and heralding the rise of new revolutionary Europe and spreading the ideas of the French Revolution throughout the continent and overseas for that matter. So this sort of wraps up our long discussions on the French Revolution and Napoleon. Thank you.